Hey everybody, welcome today to a real live class. I am just thrilled to see those of you who we've never seen in person before. It was so important to Mr. Henggeler and myself that you guys have like one speaker experience in person, and we are ending your year with the best speaker of the year. They have my students have had some other speakers come in, but not in person, so this is extra special. Helie could have zoomed in today. I wouldn't have asked her to come in, but she wanted you guys to have a normal experience. I mean, as normal as you can get with masks on during a pandemic, during a senior year when you guys have lost so much. So you know the book Still Life with Rice. It's one of my favorite memoirs to teach. It might just be my favorite memoir to teach. And for many years I didn't teach seniors, and then last year I came back to teach seniors, but you know what happened last year, and the year was weird, so we didn't get to the book. This year I made sure that we got to this book. It's such an important one, and Helie is the most remarkable speaker. Please give her a warm welcome, and there will be questions at the end. Again, one more time, please make sure that your phones are in your bags, away from any temptation, and sending you massive love right now for doing that. Helie Lee, welcome.
Hi guys, thank you. I'm going to step in front. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Is that okay with you, Sophie? Okay. Thank you. You know, this is so challenging because I have not done a speaking engagement since COVID, and also having this mask. And speaking is so important to me that I make contact with you guys. So all you can see, but here's my face, just in case you wanted to see it. Okay. But thank you. You know, I never say no to Miss Goler. She has seen me through the evolution and journey from my first book, writing my second book with the rescue mission of my uncle's family, and then actually saving them, and then writing the second book, and then also I was scheduled to speak at her school the day that my grandmother passed away.
Oh, that's right.
And then I came in, I think, the next day because I knew it was so important to my grandmother that her story continues on and the story of her son continues on. So I came here that following day, and I would only do that for Miss Goler. And so, and I had made a pact with her, as long as she continues to teach my grandmother's story or share my grandmother's story, I will come to your school. But I have such a warm place in my heart for this school. So thank you so much. Just to give you a little, well, I know Miss Goler's class finished the book, correct?
Really close. Just the last chapter.
Oh no! I told you. Did I tell them the end? Did I give it away?
I think they have a good sense of where it's going.
Well, just to give you a little background, because I opened up Still Life with my story. And, you know, I was born in South Korea. My family immigrated to the States when I was about 5 years old. And when we got here, we literally landed on, you know, Pico and Vermont, which is now Koreatown, right? But back then, there was no such thing as Koreatown, and we lived in this apartment complex, and I really loved it because my neighbors were Indian, they were Japanese, they were, you know, African American, they were Mexican American, and we were all living in this apartment complex, and I thought, oh my God, the food is just amazing. You can get any kind of food from any neighbor. But my parents were so concerned that I was growing up in this very eclectic neighborhood because they knew that the success in this country was all about education. And they wanted us to speak like white people because they thought there is no way they would raise enough money to bring our entire family, 5 members from America, back to Korea someday. And that was it. You know, getting on that plane was like winning the lotto. It was like having $1 million back then to be able to come to America. So they said, you are now American. You're going to speak like an American. You're going to get married and have your children here, and don't think about the past. So they schlepped us from, you know, Koreatown, or what was not Koreatown back then, all the way to the valley, in the San Fernando Valley. And when I got there, it was such a cultural shock because coming from this, you know, ethnic pot, salad bowl or what have you, to the valley, all of a sudden my friends were all Jewish. And I was in the 8th grade, and I was like, wow, it's a whole different set of customs and traditions. And, but it was all America to me. And And I wanted to fit in so badly with my friends that I decided to completely transform myself. That meant, I went to the beach every weekend with my friends to tan my skin so I wouldn't look olive. Back then they said yellow. So I wouldn't be Oriental looking. Back then they said Oriental. And y'all know Oriental is not the correct word, right? Oriental means oppression. It means rugs and furniture. But that's what we were called back then. And so I would tan my skin. I would cut out little bits of Scotch tape, put it on my eyelids so that they would have the Caucasian double fold. I would put lemon juice in my hair so that my hair would turn orange. And I thought orange was like the best color ever because I felt like I looked like them. And I really tried to erase my past. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself because I looked like somebody totally different from my family. And I never saw my parents growing up because they were immigrants. My mother went to the Harvard of Korea, but when she came here, she could not speak the language. They had only $300 in their pockets. My father was an electrical engineer. He specialized in radar science. But they came to this country not knowing the language, only $300 in their pockets. And so they couldn't get a job. So my mom ended up getting a job in downtown LA in a sweatshop just sewing. She had no idea how to sew, but she taught herself very quickly. And my father did get a job working as an electrical engineer. But I never saw my parents. They were always on the 405 freeway or the 10 freeway or the 101 freeway. So they would leave at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and they would come back around 8 o'clock, made sure we had our dinner, made sure we did our homework, and that was it. The only time my parents showed up was the day of report card days. I had no idea how they would know when report cards showed up. But that's the day they would come and sit us down, and we would have to present our report cards. And for every A, you get a toy. We could go to we could go to Toys R Us, and you could pick out anything for every A. For a B+, you got nothing. So my older sister, being the smart one, had 7 A's, and she would always come back with an arm blow. And I would get 2 A's in art and PE. And so my parents were like, you got to step this up, because the only reason why we came to this country was so that you can get a good education and do something with your life here. So when they asked me to choose colleges, I thought, we couldn't, for us, the East Coast was not even an option because we thought we couldn't afford it. And I didn't even know that half of the world existed. And so they said, we really would like for you to apply to the UC because that's what we can afford. And so they really wanted me to go to UCLA because it was close to home. And they also found out there was a lot of Korean kids there. But I, thinking I was not Korean, applied to UC Santa Barbara, and that's the only school I applied to, and I got in. And I thought, oh my God, I totally fit in. Everybody's blonde and hair, blue eyes, and tanned, and I look like everybody else. And so I had the time of my life, and then my parents actually, my junior year, they said, you have to transfer back to UCLA because we don't know what you're doing in Santa Barbara. You need to reconnect with your culture and your people. And I was like, what people are that? My people are Jewish people. I grew up with Jewish kids. I thought I was Jewish, And so they wanted me to come back to LA, and then because they paid for my education, I came back, and then, all of a sudden there was all these Asian kids in my university, and I just could not relate to them because I had completely erased what was Asian of me, what was Korean of me. And I always felt like the oddball out. In fact, I felt like the odd person out in every situation because I was not authentic. And then once I graduated from UCLA, I was just trying to think, what do I want to do with my life? I had been running away for so long from my hair color to my skin color to the shape of my eyes to my Korean family, who are my Oriental family, that I had no idea who I was or what I wanted to be at the age of 22. I had this amazing degree, but I had no idea what I was supposed to do with that. because I had no idea who I was. And so what I did was I decided to go back to Korea to see what was so great about this country that my parents, after immigrating for so many years, could not let go of. Even though they told us, forget about Korea, be 100% American, focus on here, they were still, their hearts and their politics were still connected to the homeland. And then literally when I turned 18, they were like, "You're Korean again." I was like I told you, I was like, "No, I'm not, I'm Jewish." And they're like, "No, you're Korean." And so I decided to go back to Korea because my Jewish friends had gone back to Israel to go find themselves. They all came back pretty, together. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Korea. I'm going to go find myself. So I ended up working for a year, and I saved all that money, and I bought a one-way ticket to Korea. And my parents were so happy. I mean, they were like, hallelujah. They were praying to Jesus, like, thank you. May she go to Korea and find herself a nice Korean husband. But that was the last thing on my mind. So I get to Korea, and I know nothing about this country. But when I land in Seoul, there's this like mob of people waiting for me. And I was like, who are these people? And it turns out they're all my relatives that I never even knew existed. But they knew every single detail of my life. If I was, what teams I were on, when I tried out for this thing, or, what accomplishments they knew about my 5th grade grades when I didn't do well. They knew everything. But I knew all of a sudden I was exposed to 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th cousins. And I thought for a second, I was kind of bummed out and pissed off that my parents did not tell me I had all these relatives back there. But then as I became more mature, I realized the reason why they never told us about our relatives in Korea is because they didn't want to share the pains of the past. They really wanted us to forget about the war. They wanted us to forget about Japanese occupation of Korea. They wanted us to forget about the torture in North Korea. They wanted us to forget all that so that when my siblings and I were in America, we were completely pure, a clean slate. So all we had to worry about, our only job was to get good grades so that we can get into college, so we can get a good career, so that we can have a life that my parents and my grandparents never had. And so when I got to Korea, my relatives literally just embraced me, took me home, and they fed me like amazing food, but they also fed me stories about my Helie, which is the Korean word for grandmother. And they told me about her working in a leper colony, treating leopards, how she's a healer, how she walked with 4 kids from North Korea to South Korea while there were bombs, raining down on their country. And I was like, are we talking about the same Helie here? She doesn't even know how to use a microwave or a remote control. How did she manage to do all of this stuff, right? And so after spending a year in Korea, I came back. My father picked me up at the airport. My father, to this day, and I'm over 50, I have to tell you, to this day, will meet me at the airport. Like my husband, he has to take a back seat to my father because my father wants to be the one to pick me up at the airport. He will take my bags for me, and when I remember landing in LA, and he's like, "Welcome to America." You want to go to McDonald's? That's to him like what America represents, right? And I said, "No, I want to go see Helie." So he drove me to my grandmother's house. And I remember walking through the door, taking off my shoes, and going up to my Helie and bowing to her. And I said, "Helie, why?" And this is the first time I could actually have a conversation with her, because before going to Korea, I could say, I need to go to the bathroom, I'm not hungry, Mom's at the factory, you won't see her till 9, things like that, basic conversation. But I was able to, my Korean has really stepped up. I really tried hard to learn the language. So when I came back, I was able to communicate with her. And I said, "Helie, I heard all these stories about you. Are they true?" And she said, oh yeah, that's what I did. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me? And she said, because you never asked. I had been so busy using and abusing my American privileges as a teenage girl that I really thought the world, revolved around me, and I never took the time to ask my grandmother. I never took the time to ask my parents, why did you come to this country? It wasn't for them to have a better life. It was for us to have a better life. And they left everything behind. And so I remember, at that moment, hearing these stories, my life was changing in such ways that I didn't even understand, that I was so obsessed and possessed with hearing her stories that I would literally go back all the time to my Harmony's house and sit down with her and ask her questions. And then I started writing it down because I wanted to not forget. And I also wanted to share with my younger brother and my younger cousins the greatness of this grandmother that we all kind of shunned and thought she was like, this helpless woman. And here she is, this woman warrior. So I started writing down. In fact, I got fired from my job because I was constantly calling in sick. But I was literally possessed with this story. And I would wake up in the morning and brush my teeth, make myself a cup of coffee, and I would sit down in front of my computer and I would just write. And then I would stop at the end of the day when I was completely exhausted. It was night outside. It was time for me to go to bed. And I kept this up 7 days a week for about 3 or 4 months. And I remember when I was finished, and I thought, oh my God, it was such a spiritual experience for me, because when you know you're doing something right, and you're doing something so special that it just sort of comes through you, and you're sometimes not even aware what you're doing. And then I stopped, and I had 500 pages in front of me. In high school and college, I have never written anything past 11 pages. And that almost killed me, right? But here I had 500 pages, and I thought, oh my God, who is going to read this? Nobody's going to read this, because I know my spelling sucks and my grammar is probably terrible. And back then we did not have spell check. We did not have grammar check. And when you made a mistake, you literally had to pull it out and retype everything all over again. But I just want you to feel sorry for me, because that's how difficult it was to be a writer. But I had it on my desk, and I literally just walked away, and I thought, okay, thank God I did that. Now I'm going to move on. I'm going to start my life and go, figure out what I need to do. But a girlfriend had come over one day, and she disappeared into my apartment, and she never came out. And I went in, and she was reading my book, my manuscript. And I was so mortified, because I told you, I'm the worst speller in the world. And she goes, this is really good. Why don't you get it published? And I was like, well, I'm not a writer. I'm supposed to go to medical school. That's what my parents want me to do, or law school, because as a child of immigrants, you only get 3 choices, especially a girl. You can go to law school, medical school, or you can get married, right? And neither of those options seemed possible for me at that time. And so they said, so my girlfriend goes, why don't you get it published? And I didn't know about the publishing world, No, I had no mentors. I knew nobody who was an author or writer around me. And so I said, well, how do you get something published? And she goes, just go to the library. But I am a very smart girl, and I went to the best library. I went to the Beverly Hills Library. That's where I went. And I literally walked up to the library, and I said, I need to know how to publish a book. And then she handed me a book that says, how to publish a book. So I looked at it, and I read the instructions, and it said you have to double space everything. You can only print on one side. You have to send a self-addressed stamped envelope in case they reject you, so that you could pay for your own return rejection, right? But I didn't have that money, because remember, I had gotten fired. I was down to my last $300, and my rent was coming up, and it was $500 for my rent. So I decided to break all the rules. I single-spaced. I printed on both sides. I did not send a return envelope with a stamp, but I wrote the most beautiful love letter about my grandmother. And I also, I went to the Xerox machine. I put my face on the copier, and I copied the half of my face, and I hand wrote a special letter. And I could only afford 10 envelopes because I sent a couple chapters and my cover letter, and I decided to send it out. And I prayed like somebody was going to read it. Within like 2 weeks, all of them either called me or wrote me and said, please send us more, or we want to sign you. We think we can sell your book. The only person who said I needed to go to school to learn how to write, and that nobody was going to pay for $15 for this book, was this agent in San Francisco, and she was the only female Asian agent that I sent it to. Girlfriend was jealous, I think, right? Right? But that is the only letter I kept. Because when somebody tells me I cannot, I think to myself, I can, I will, and I will show you. And nobody will underestimate me. So I took that letter. That is the only letter I kept. I put it on my refrigerator so I could see that every day when I opened my empty refrigerator. And the next thing I knew, my book was published. And it was out in the world. It was at all the stores like Barnes & Noble. I don't know if you guys know Borders, but it was all there. And I remember going to my parents because they were pressuring me. They were like, okay, have you taken your test to go in LSATs and stuff to apply to graduate school? And I said, well, I sort of wrote a book. I'm supposed to go on a book tour. They were like, what? You're not a writer. You didn't study for Asians, it's like, you didn't study for that, so how are you going to do that, right? I said, well, and so I drove them to Barnes & Noble, and for some reason they had my book in the display in the front window, and I took my mother and my father and my harmony, and I showed them the window, and they looked at the cover, and then they looked at me, and they looked at the cover, and it said Helie, and my dad goes, is that you? I said, how many Helies do you know? It's not like my name is Grace Kim, it's like Helie. And so my parents were like, oh, okay, and where are you going? I said, my first engagement is Howard University. It's the African American school. And so began my journey of being a writer and speaker. And I never spoke in front of people before. And they literally put me into the fire at Howard University. It was right after the LA riots. The Koreans and the African Americans, we were having that friction and so here I was going to the school. But my grandmother's story transcends race, culture, feelings. It is the story we all can understand and appreciate because hopefully we all have grandparents that we adore. And how many of you were not born in this country? Raise your hand. Keep it up. How many of you, your parents were not born in this country? Raise your hand. Your grandparents were not raised in this country. So we are all children or grandchildren of people who have come to this country to set a better life for all of us. And so, America sometimes has our problems, but I'm always grateful for this country so that I could not only move forward in my life, but my children's life, but also always remember the past. And if you have grandparents or parents who are still accessible to you, I tell you with a lot of experience and love, take that moment and to have a conversation. And when teachers assign their oral history assignment, that's the one assignment the students always keep. And when you know where you are from and who you come from and hear their amazing stories, because I tell you, anybody of your grandparents' generation have amazing stories. you will realize how incredibly strong and special each of one of you is. And it allowed me to realize that my backbone was strong, that nothing, when people tell me no, I say, do you know who I come from? Do you know who my harmony is? So I always tell myself, I can, I will, and I'll show you. So I hope you remember that. And, you know, when I wrote that story, I never thought anything was going to happen after Still Life with Rice, because I discovered my history, I discovered my grandmother's life, but then where do I go from here? I was a freshman author. Your first book or your first album is called your freshman effort. So I was like, I didn't really train to do this. I don't know where my life is going to go. Also, my grandmother's story sort of stopped. At the end of the book, I'm going to tell you guys, is a letter that my grandmother received from her son, Youngwon, from North Korea. You know, when I was sitting down beside my grandmother, she was saying this name, Youngwon, Youngwon. I said, who is that? She goes, that's my son. I said, well, where is he? And she said, I lost him in North Korea. And my grandmother had not heard from him since 1950, December. And this was when I was sitting down with her, it was in the early 90s, when I was starting to uncover my family's history. And she said she didn't know whether he was alive or had been tortured in North Korea, had been caught, or died during the war. So that question was always a heartache for her, the not knowing. Had he died in her arms, she would have been able to put closure to it, but because she didn't know her son. And she last saw him when he was 16 years old. How many of you are 16? Yeah, she last saw her son when he was 16 years old. And she said goodbye to him. She told him, come back home once the war stops. But the war didn't stop, and she had 4 other children, and she knew she had to leave and fight for her. She wanted to at least die trying to save their lives and just die staying at home. So she never saw her son. But when I was writing my grandmother's story, it was so weird because all of a sudden, this name that I never heard of my entire life, suddenly everybody was talking about Youngwon, you know, what he was like, what possibly could have happened to him. And then literally as I was finishing Still Life with Rice, a letter arrived from North Korea telling my grandmother that Youngwon was alive in North Korea, and he had been there all these years. And I remember rushing to her house and saying, oh my God, Harmony, aren't you excited? And she was just so somber, and she said, all these years my son has been alive and his mother didn't know. Did he think his mother had abandoned him? And, you know, the one criticism or the 2 criticisms, or not criticisms, or questions that I get from Still Life is they said, why would you end Still Life on that letter? The heartache of finding her son and not being able to go to him. What happened next? And I said, I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen next. That's why I wanted you to feel my grandmother's suffering and her heartache. And so when you close the book, may you think about her for days and weeks and months and potentially years to come, until the day that North and South Korea could be reunited again. But as I wrote that letter, as I finished the book and I'm touring around, you know, I never thought there was going to be a conclusion to this story. But because my book was translated into several languages and it ended up in South Korea, there was somebody who actually read the book and approached our family and said, you know, I think I can help you rescue your uncle from North Korea. This is what I do. I help families. And it just seems so unreal. And he said you should do it very quickly, because this book that Helie wrote has now put her uncle's family in danger in North Korea. Because she wrote about our family escaping to the South during the Korean War. I talk about communism being bad. I wrote my uncle's full name. And I also put the letter at the end of the book written by my family. And so my parents here thought, we have no choice. It's a 1 in a million chance that we will succeed and everybody will survive. But we felt like we had no other option. And my grandmother said to me, it is going to take somebody like you to make this happen for all of us, because you have your Korean face, but you have your American savvy and education and connections to make this possible for us. So we just decided to go for it. And what we thought was going to be a 2-week rescue plan turned out to be almost a 7-month-long odyssey, where me with my grandmother, or my grandmother, my father, and myself would go to China many times throughout that period to try to work with safe house owners, drivers, translators, gangsters, to secure a safe route for my uncle and his family to escape out of North Korea into China and find their way out of China. So that is the story that I wrote in my second book, In the Absence of Sun, and Miss Goler was there during the whole time when I was, during the rescue mission, I would come and speak when I had an opportunity, and then I'd go back to China, and then when I'm writing the story, I would come and speak, and so she had been part of my journey, and so I consider this relationship very special to me, and I feel, I'm very grateful that Beverly Hills continues to teach the book and share my grandmother's story. So thank you so much for coming today, guys. Getting out of your pajama bottoms, because I know you wear nice shirts on top and your pajama bottoms on the bottom. And thank you for listening to my grandmother's story. 감사합니다.
Thank you so much, Helie. We have time to take some questions that you guys may have that are maybe based on your reading of the book, or if you didn't read the book, if you have any questions. If not, I have a couple questions that I can ask as well. Nick?
I do have a question.
Nick, do you want to come up and ask at the microphone, because we're capturing it?
Come on, Nick. Your classmates want to see what you look like.
You have to ask right in
Yep.
the microphone.
So your the escape plan for your uncle was based on that river between North Korea and China?
Yes.
I forgot, what's the river called? I've seen it in Google Earth before.
Oh, that's amazing. That's called the Yalu River. May I use the board? Thank you, Nick. I would love to touch you and hug you, but I can't. My drawing is really, I am not an artist. Is there?
I don't even know.
Okay, that's fine. The border between North Korea and South Korea is called the demilitarized zone, which is a lie, because it is the most militarized zone in the entire world. You have landmines. You have thousands of soldiers standing guard. There are watchtowers. There are speakers, and so it's impossible to cross that border. But recently, I did hear somebody did literally high jump over the border. It was the craziest thing. It was something out of like 007. Our mission was something out of like 007. But the easiest way, or the most likely way to escape from North Korea, is on the northern side, the border between North Korea and China. And it's a natural border. It's a river. It's called the Yalu River. And it goes from one end of North Korea to the bottom end. And in certain areas of that river, it's very dangerous and treacherous. But where my uncle lived, which was about an hour's walk from the river, because in North Korea, in that area, in the poorest areas, the further you get away from the capital of Pyongyang, the worse life conditions are. So there's no bicycles, there are no cars or trains or any of that stuff. So all the anytime you need to get anywhere, you have to be able to walk. And his house was about an hour walking distance from the river. And because my uncle had suffered so much in the hands of the North Koreans, because they found out that his family had all defected during the Korean War to the south, they also found out that my grandmother and my grandfather were rich landowners, and they were also Christians. So he had all these strikes against him. He was considered a national traitor. So he had been exiled from living in the capital city of Pyongyang to this remote area, all the way north to about, where the border of North Korea and China is. But because he and his family had been exiled there, he was so close to the border that it was such a fortune for us. And because the further inland you are, it is impossible, because the moment an entire family escapes or disappears from their household, all the other neighbors know, because there is a 5-house system. 5 houses are responsible for each other. If somebody says something wrong, or they find out somebody's doing something illegal or said something bad about their North Korean dictator, the 5 houses will report on each other. They spy on each other. And because if somebody gets caught doing something and they don't report on each other, all 5 households get sent to a concentration camp. And I do not use that word lightly. That is exactly what it is. It's a concentration camp. And what happens is, not only are those households, but 3 generations, parents, grandparents, and grandchildren all get sent away. So that's why it's very hard for a North Korean to protest or rebel or even try to escape to save themselves, because they know everybody else is dead. So, but in the 90s, when the famine in North Korea was so horrible, people were literally just dying in the streets. From five houses, they shrank it down to 3 houses. So you were under more scrutiny. At that time, that's when we were trying to get my uncle's family out of North Korea. And the moment you disappear, everybody knows. And that's when the Secret Service is sent out and they go hunting for these escapees. So we were able to, with a lot of bribery, and I tell you, even though the North Koreans hate the Americans, the US dollar is still powerful. It's coveted. So using American dollars, well, not dollars, like $100 bills, basically, we were able to get my uncle and 8 members of his family to cross the border. And the youngest one was just a couple months old. My cousin just gave birth. My uncle was 62 years old at that time. My uncle and my father were the same age, and yet my uncle looked as old as his mother because of the torture and the famine and the struggles in that country. So getting this massive group of people across the border into China was very difficult. But the crazy thing was, getting them out of China was even more challenging, because the moment a North Korean enters into China, the Chinese government do not consider these people as political refugees. They consider them as economic seekers. They're there to make money. They're there to get a job. And so they will capture them. And the Chinese people, locals around the area, have gotten kind of weary about the North Koreans crossing over, because during the famine, so many were trying to escape into China, and they were like pillaging for food and clothes, whatever they can get to survive. And so they were considered a dangerous nuisance. So they would be turned in immediately. But the lucky few who had family like us to help shepherd them, help hide them, drive them, feed them, wash them, so that they could pass as local people, was quite a challenge, because North Korean people tend to be shorter. In that country, the next generation is actually shorter than the generation before them because of the famine and because of the lifestyle. And they're skinnier, they're darker, because they are constantly out working in the fields, walking anywhere they can. And they're dirty because they don't have soap. They don't have access to clean water. So you can point out a North Korean so easily. So the moment we got them into China, we literally had to wash them, scrub their skin every day, multiple times a day, until they had like bug bites everywhere, from lice and fleas and bugs that we have gotten rid of in this country, but have eaten them up. And so that was a challenge, in getting them to wear the new clothes that were just kind of hanging off them because they were all bony, and then teaching them to walk. Because, people always tell me when I go to Asia, they go, oh, we can tell you're an American right away. And I was like, oh, is it my clothes? And they said, no, it's how you walk. Americans walk with a lot of sense of freedom and confidence, and I could be whoever I want to be. That kind of attitude. In North Korea, they've been so demoralized and punished and tortured that they all walk with so much fear, and that you can see the anxiety and the tension and the thought of being caught. So they're easy to point out. So we had to educate them on how to walk as well outside. So it was quite a journey, and that's why our rescue took so long. That was a long answer.
That was a great. No, I knew. I'm so glad you told them the story of what happened with your uncle. Is there another question? Jory, can you come up and ask at the mic?
Was there a point during the rescue where you wanted to give up, or you felt like it was too hard? And if so, what kept you going?
Oh, so many times. The first time I was at the border, standing on the China side, I was literally looking across the river into North Korea, and I saw my uncle for the first time, and I told you, he looked like a skeleton. I was thinking he was going to be like the 16-year-old boy that my grandmother last saw, like this really jovial, handsome, vivacious guy. And then there was this skeleton old man across the river, and I just was thinking, what am I doing here? Just by being there, I could get him killed. And I just thought I was way over my head. I'm just a girl from the valley. What the hell am I doing here? Trying to save these people's lives. But it is the knowledge that my book had placed these people's lives in danger was the reason why I stayed. And, I just stayed focused. I was like, I'm doing this for my Helie. I'm doing this for my mother. And I just stayed focused. When there's a storm going around and you're in the middle of the storm, it's really calm there. And that's what it felt like. I just felt like everything was in chaos all the time, but I was in the middle, and I just stayed focused. And the moment I started to panic, I just always went back to the fact that this is for my Helie.
Thank you. Simone, do you have a question? Okay, does anybody else have a question? I have one that I'd just love them to hear about. So Helie is not only an author, she's a producer, she's a performance artist. And I wanted you to talk about your journey into becoming a Korean man. The last time we talked about that, it was totally a crazy thing that you were doing. Mm-hmm. And now, as many people are experiencing transitions and trans folks for the first time, the conversation may have changed. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about that for a moment and what you did. I'll never forget when you came to speak to us kind of as a man. Are you guys curious? Yeah. Right? I mean, like...
after I came back from Asia and the rescue mission, I thought I had done, and we rescued my uncle and 8 members of his family, and we got them all to South Korea. And I thought, I'm on top of the world. I could do anything. I'm such a, badass, And then I come back, and it was all about, why aren't you married? Why are you over 30, unmarried, without any kids? And every time also when I was in Asia, I was dealing with gangsters and translators and all of this stuff. And sometimes my family sent me on my own to be their representative. And I would carry like thousands of dollars of cash, US dollars. And I would have to deal with these people. And they would not take money from my hand. because I was a single woman. I would literally have to give the money to my father so my father could give it to them because they would not take it from me. And then at the end of the day, when the men were kind of like drinking and just, relaxing to relieve their stress, I'd be like, oh, can I have a glass of, can I have a drink too? And they're like, does your daddy know you drink? And I was over 21, and I had thought I had accomplished a lot in my life, and here they were treating me like such a woman child because I was not married and I didn't have children. I was over 30, and so that really pissed me off. So when I came back to the States, I thought, why is it that these buffoons get more respect than I do, and I've accomplished so much more than they have in their lives? And it really got me to thinking, and I thought, it's not just in Korea. It's not just in Asia. It's like all over the world. Women are like second-class citizens in many instances, right? Our value is not completely recognized or appreciated. And I thought, just one day, I would like to be a guy. I just want to know what it feels like. I want to roll around in the privilege, not because I earned it, but because I had been born with the body part that I did not get at birth. And so I thought, dang, I just rescued 9 people from North Korea. Why can I not be a man? So I cut my hair, I changed my clothes, I moved out of my home and into a totally different neighborhood where nobody would know me as Helie, a female. And I started my life.
I just want to add, I'd never seen your eyebrows like that before. Like there was no eyebrow anything happening at that time.
That's what you remember.
That is what I remember.
So I literally cut my hair, changed my clothes. I moved out of my home where everybody knew me as Helie, a woman, and I started new as Harry. And the reason why I chose the name Harry is because my name being Helie and having Korean parents, Koreans cannot pronounce their, certain letters correctly, right? They get their L's and their R's confused and their V's and their B's confused. So all my life, my parents called me Harry. All their friends called me Harry. So I thought, it's so apropos. I'll just be Harry. And so I started my life journey as Harry. The transition was, I thought the moment I did all this, I was going to be a guy, no problem. I'll be able to experience this whole thing. But it took a lot of prepping and transformation and mental adjustment to make that transformation. I went from being very androgynous, where people didn't know what my gender was, and then I started passing as a very feminine, young Asian guy. And then I started passing as, first I was passing as a very masculine female. People thought I was like a lesbian. They thought I was very butchy looking. And so I don't know if that's the correct word. Am I allowed to say that? I'm not sure. I got to know what my correct sayings is. So they thought I was very butch, female. And then I transitioned to androgynous. And then I transitioned to a very young, without the makeup and the hair and stuff, I looked very young. And because I was also slender, they thought I was this very young, feminine Asian guy. And then I just started transitioning as a guy. And you know what it was that put me over the edge to make the final transition? What I had to do to myself so that people started believing I was just a straight guy. Does anybody know what that magic would be?
Sexy?
No, no, because I want to be a female eventually. My voice? Yeah, my voice is pretty high. I tried everything. And then I realized, don't talk. Don't move. Don't show too much facial expression. So I would literally just put, and as a woman, I use my hands. I'm always touching and hugging and, and looking people deeply in the eyes. So I stopped all that. I literally just put my hands in my pocket. I stopped looking at people. I would only answer, yeah, sure, what's up? And that's when I started to transition. Because, women tend to be more expressive. We're more talkative, generally. And we enjoy eye contact. But when I did that, people immediately tagged me as not being a straight male. So when I stopped all that, I started to pass. And that's when I started to really experience what it was like, what I thought it was like to be a straight man in this country. And I was only going to do it for about 10 weeks, 24/7. Never went back to myself, even when I went to sleep. But the longer I did it, the more confused I became about men. I thought I knew men. I thought I knew how you think, how you function, how life treats you. But the longer I lived this life, I realized I knew nothing. I knew nothing about how men think or how they feel or the privileges that I thought they had. And so I actually lived as a dude, as a guy, for about 6.5 months. And what finally triggered it for me to stop was I realized that the grass is not always greener on the other side. It is so much harder being a man than I actually thought. And I came out of that experience. For me, anything I go into, I pray to God that I come out of it a better person. And I came out of it really appreciating men, really respecting the challenges that they go through that I never thought men go through. And it made me such a better daughter to my father, made me a better sister to my brother, certainly a better wife to my husband these days, because I understand, I think, him more than I would have had I not done the experience. And I remember I did that experience, and I actually documented everything on a video camera, because everybody told me, we don't believe you're going to do it, and if you do it, there's no way you're going to pass. So I documented everything, and I started to show people snippets of my footage, and they were like, oh my God, this is funny. What are you going to do with this? And I thought, well, maybe I'll make it into a one-woman show, and also a documentary which I could enter into the film festivals. And I just remember people saying, you're not a filmmaker. You're not a performer. And then, of course, I did it, and I actually ended up, the LA Weeklies picked it as one of their favorite shows for that year. And then I actually went to Edinburgh, Scotland, to do the festival over there for the one-woman show. And it was completely life-changing. I loved that experience, but frankly, I would never be a man again. It is way too hard. There are so many privileges that we girls get that we don't sometimes realize or acknowledge that guys don't get. We think they get all of the stuff, but so do we. And then when you are aware of it, it really changes your perspective. And I actually have the DVD if you wanted to show to your class.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I will. I'll try to maybe deliver next week or something to you, so you can take a look at it. But always put yourself in a situation that allows for you to grow emotionally, spiritually, maybe even physically. Well, COVID had made us all grow a little physically, but right. But so that's what I did, and I continue to challenge myself to do different things, and I hope you do too. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Helie. Thank you so much for coming to Beverly. It's always such a treat, and I don't know how many of you guys have ever had an opportunity in the past to meet the author of a book that you're reading in school. So it's really exciting for them. They've had a terrible year. I feel for these students so much.
This grade especially.
Yeah.
I always talk about your grade.
But one thing, and I hope Helie's life and her grandmother's life represents to you guys for the last 16 months of hardship, is that resilience is really the key. Like this was a bummer of a year, but what if we take this year And we recognize it as a gift to maybe explore some things that we didn't necessarily know about before, or to dig deeper with our family, or to explore a sport maybe that we weren't so into before. I really think you guys have it in you to be resilient and to follow the example of Helie's harmony. Did I do okay with that word? Thank you. And to rise above your circumstances this year. This is 1 year of your life that's going to make you better parents and spouses and just people in the world. So,
You know, I was just reading this article as I was coming here. It's the pandemic is the reset button.
yeah.
You know, we were all on this treadmill going from tutoring sessions to sports events to pleasing our parents to pleasing everybody, doing all of this stuff, and it was exhausting. And I just remember when everything shut down, I was like, I could breathe again, right? And I have to say to you guys, it is not important to get into Princeton or Harvard. It is more important to get into the school that gets you, that will allow, if you have a passion for filmmaking, find that school. If you have a passion for writing, find that school. It does not, at the end of the day, nobody cares where you graduate from. They want to know that you have the passion for what you do and you're good at it. So, you know, I was recently, my husband is a TV producer and we're developing the show, and he's like the college whisperer. He advises, you know, kids from 8th grade on how to prepare for college, how to get those applications, what you need to do along the way. It is exhausting. But he said, he always tells the parents, listen to your children. It is not, who cares if they go to these Ivy League schools? Because if they're not happy, they will not succeed. So let that pressure, this is the year to let that pressure go. Go where you will find your tribe, where you will find your passion, and succeed that way. Happiness is the key to success. Don't do something you hate doing for the next 30, 40 years, because I guarantee you, you will pick something else halfway through your midlife crisis. So find your passion, which is the key, and then go after it. Okay?
And that is a great note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.